Hello, dreamers, and welcome back to your latest episode of Killafornia Dreaming. This is part 2 of our coverage of the 2023 implosion of OceanGate Expeditions' Titan submersible that took the lives of the company's CEO and 4 other paying passengers. So if you haven't listened to part 1, episode 320, you'll want to listen to that first and then come back to 321. We left off where we were going to begin the OceanGate timeline, beginning at its founding. So we're going to pick it up from there. But real quick, I want to thank those of you who responded to me saying in my last episode that Patreon could use some love. Several of you came through for me, and I appreciate you so much. This podcast has sustained me for the better part of the last 8 years, and you continue to do so. And I'm so grateful for it. The oil shop is improving, but I'm still in the red. So every little bit helps. And I'm so grateful for all of you. I'm also moving to a bigger apartment this weekend. So I am recording this right before I start packing because I didn't want to leave part 2 hanging in limbo without any idea of when I was going to have it done. I have until the 17th to move. And I just picked up the keys right before I sat down to do this. So I'm really excited. All right, let's get to the episode. OceanGate was founded, as I stated, in 2009 and was based in Everett, Washington. And of this, an article on independent.co.uk said, quote, Stockton Rush chose Everett for his company OceanGate because it was close to Boeing's factory and aerospace firms, which provided expertise in using titanium and carbon fiber for submersible technology. This location was crucial for the development of the Titan submersible, which Rush aimed to create to explore the deep ocean and to provide better access for scientists and researchers. In February of 2012, OceanGate expanded to Florida and to the Caribbean. And the reason for that is because the Bahamas offers an ideal location for long-term testing and operations for the deep-sea submersibles that Stockton was constructing. It has just the right environment for testing, so this was a very strategic decision for Stockton and his submersible. There's also some historical significance to Stockton, but now he's left some legacies of his own for his kids and grandkids and great-grandkids to someday start off a TED Talk with or a keynote with. I'm the descendant of the imploding submersible guy. OceanGate was registered as a corporation in Miami, so yeah. And that is something that I recently did, and my podcast has fallen under the umbrella of my corporation as well. So a little more than a year after that expansion, OceanGate announced a new partnership with the University of Washington as they planned to collaborate with the Applied Physics Department on Project Cyclops, which was to be a brand new 5-person submersible capable of 3,000-meter dives. That summer of 2013, OceanGate partnered with Nova Southeastern University to conduct a study of lionfish in Florida. In August of 2013, OceanGate announced that the University of Washington completed its design feasibility study for the hull designs of the Cyclops submersible. When I looked up the study, I found that the study was also conducted with Boeing, and the hull design was validated for the submersible to reach depths of 3,000 meters. I linked this report in the show notes if you want to take a look at it. So OceanGate, in under 4 years, is already making money moves. And this is very encouraging for Stockton. 2 years after that, in June of 2015, Stockton, along with Science and Technology Director Erica Montag, published a report on Cyclops 1 with Peter Brodsky, an engineer at the University of Washington. Now, I have to ask the question, were they in compliance? I looked around to see if I could find out the findings of the 2015 report on the Cyclops, but based on everything that happened in the ensuing years following that, 2016, 2017, 2018, I don't think Stockton Rush was getting the answers that he wanted any longer. What I did find when I was looking around for those reports was a timeline of the warnings that Stockton received in the years leading up to the implosion, and I mean years, a couple of years of being told he can't do what he thinks he can do, going back to the mid-2010s. By 2018, concerns about what Stockton was doing had reached a fever pitch within the submersible community, and that would include all of the leading experts and authorities in the field, to a point where they actually conducted what kind of sounded like an intervention of sorts, a large-scale group effort to try not only put a stop to what Stockton was attempting to do, but to voice their concerns openly and publicly, and also to let it be known that there's a loose cannon amongst them that thinks that he's like them, except for the fact that he will be playing God with people's lives if he continues down the path that he's going. It almost feels like they're talking about some mad scientist. And in a way, if Stockton Rush isn't as near of a personification of what we think a mad scientist is, I really don't know what is, because to me, that's exactly what he ended up becoming. Now I'm going to get through more of the late 2010s timeline, and then I'll tell you a little bit about the lawsuit that was filed in 2018 against OceanGate, which really brought a great deal of attention to all the serious concerns about the safety of OceanGate's vessels. So in 2013, feasibility studies were conducted, and in 2015, a report was published. Like I said, I don't know what the report said or concluded, but just 3 months later, by November of 2015, the earliest customers interested in booking a ride on the Titanic expedition began putting down deposits. One couple in particular, Mark and Sharon Hagel, signed contracts and paid $10,000 deposits to OceanGate for their expedition trip. And then just 7 months later, in June of 2016, one of OceanGate's submersibles dove to the wreck of the Andrea Doria. So real quick, this shipwreck was a luxury transatlantic ocean liner from Italy that first went into service in 1953. It sank in 1956 and became famous for not only being one of the first, if not the first sinking that was extensively covered by the media, but also the successful rescue of most of her passengers and crew was also captured by the media as well. There were 1,706 passengers and crew on board, and 1,660 were saved. Only 46 lives were lost. In March of 2017, OceanGate announced that they had plans for Titanic dives. They let it be known to interested, bored, rich people that the company would be conducting the first manned submersible dives to the Titanic wreck site since 2005, and that private citizens may join the expedition as mission specialists at the very reasonable price of $105,129 per person. However, a couple of months later, in the summer of 2017, that couple that I mentioned a moment ago, the Hagels, if you recall, I just said it, they both put $10,000 down payments for tickets a year and a half earlier. They began to wonder if they should just ask for refunds. So you want to know what Stockton actually did? He took the time to go visit them at their home in person to reassure them that the expedition to the Titan has the green light. And Stockton spun whatever spin he needed to keep them on his death list, essentially. So in August of 2017, OceanGate completed the core pressure vessel assembly by bonding 2 titanium rings to the ends of a 56-inch wide, 100-inch long carbon fiber cylinder. 4 months later, in January of 2018, OceanGate sent out a tweet that it had successfully tested and launched the recovery platform for their Cyclops II submersible. So real quick, each submersible is equipped with an integrated launch and recovery platform that operates similarly to a ship dry dock. The platform is used to launch and recover manned submersibles by flooding its flotation tanks with water for a controlled descent to about 30 feet in order to avoid surface turbulence. Once submerged, the submersible is launched from the platform, and when the dive is done, the submersible lands on the submerged platform and the whole system is brought back up to the surface. So that's how they actually get the submersible underwater first, and then they launch it. In February of 2018, Cyclops 2 was handed over from OceanGate's engineering team to its operations team, and from there, the Cyclops 2 was renamed Titan. Seeing that progress was being made, the Hagels paid the balance due for their Titanic expedition, which was $109,258 on top of the $20,000, $10,000 for each of them, for that deposit that they paid a little more than 2 years earlier. And just as things were looking up, murmurings of safety concerns started making the rounds the following month. In March of 2018, as a trade group, the Marine Technology Society sent a letter to OceanGate to express unanimous concern regarding the development of the Titan submersible and its planned Titanic expedition. So let's see what all the leading experts in the industry had to say to Mr. Stockton Rush about what he was up to. This is the letter sent to Stockton on March 27, 2018. It reads, "Dear Stockton, this letter is sent on behalf of our industry members who have collectively expressed unanimous concern regarding the development of Titan and the planned Titanic expedition. Our apprehension is that the current experimental approach adopted by OceanGate could result in negative outcomes from minor to catastrophic that would have serious consequences for everyone in the industry. The manned underwater vessel industry has earned itself an enviable safety track record over the past 40 years. This is partly due to the diligent engineering, discipline, and professional approach exercised by members of the industry, but also due to the collective observation of and adherence to a variety of safety standards. This reputation is solid because it was hard-won over many years of diligent application and has resulted in a safe and successful record of operation. Our members are all aware of how important and precious this standing is and are deeply concerned that a single negative event could undo this. Your marketing material advertises that Titan design will meet or exceed the DNV-GL. It's now known as just DNV, which is a Norwegian abbreviation for the International Accredited Registrar and Classification Society, headquartered in Norway, that ensures compliance with safety, quality, and environmental standards across various industries, particularly in maritime and offshore sectors, also in oil, gas, renewable energy, and healthcare. The certification process involves rigorous assessments to ensure that products, services, and management systems meet specific national and international standards. That's the certifications that every submersible is expected to be able to achieve. And we know Stockton brushed aside the sort of ancillary stuff as unnecessary gobbledygook. But anyway, the letter continued. Your marketing material advertises the Titan design will meet or exceed the DNV certifications, but your representation is, at minimum, misleading to the public and breaches an industry-wide professional code of conduct we all endeavor to uphold. We do all agree that a performance-based testing program for design verification is a recognized and valid approach to new technologies. However, we recommend that at a minimum, you institute a prototype testing program that is reviewed and witnessed by DNV. While this may demand additional time and expense, it is our unanimous view that this validation process by a third party is a critical component in the safeguards that protect all submersible occupants. Together, we are all beneficiaries of the excellent safety record of MUV operations over the years, but each one of us is also a steward with a responsibility to sustain this achievement. We would be grateful if you could confirm that OceanGate can see the future benefit of its investment in adhering to our industry-accepted safety guidelines and protocols for ultimate success and that of the MUV community. So I actually watched a video on YouTube in between this part 2 and part 1 that I recorded last week, where I found out the exact battery of tests that a submersible needs to be subjected to before it can even be considered safe and pass any kind of certifications. First, they have to implode 4 of their vessels just to see if their depth ratings are accurate. If the submersibles implode all over the place at different depths and pressures, then the engineer's calculations are off and that needs to be addressed. Then the submersible has to be subjected to 3 months of constant pressure, at least twice or 3 times what it's supposed to be rated for. So like if Titan was rated for 3,000 meters, they needed to sink it to 6,000 meters for 3 months, and it had to hold itself together under that kind of constant pressure, and it has to hold up for the entire 3 months. This is actually to see how the vessel holds up under those types of harsh conditions, and if there's any type of warping or bending that takes place as a result. Then the submersible has to be subjected to 1,000 dives. I think at the depths that it's rated for. I can't exactly remember. Full disclosure, I made notes on all of this and I made notes on a separate piece of paper at the oil shop and I left it there. So I'm trying to remember this from memory. I think it has to be subjected to 1,000 dives to the depths that submersible is supposed to be rated for. That submersible has to withstand diving and surfacing that many times, which takes about 2 years to do. So this testing is no joke, and Stockton Rush wanted no part of it. He made it to Titanic with Titan a couple of times on his own, and voila, he thinks his submersible is invincible. The letter that I read was redacted, but it was signed by either 6 people or 6 entities. So basically, what they're telling Stockton in so many words is to stop messing everything up for everybody else. Stop messing with everybody's hard work to get to this point, and stop messing with everybody's future in this industry. You're ruining everything, and just stop. It's really funny how 2 people can look at the same thing and see it so differently. In the beginning of the letter, it stated that the safety track record for the submersible industry had been impeccable for 4 decades. And here comes Stockton Rush, and in his opinion, the safety record he's quoted as having said, "There hasn't been an injury in the commercial sub industry in over 35 years. It's obscenely safe because they have all these regulations." He called no deaths in 35 years obscene. The authors of the letter called the safety record enviable, described their work as diligent engineering discipline with a professional approach, by observing and adhering to safety standards, that they have a solid reputation with a safe and successful track record, and just how precious and important that is to everybody in this industry. And they described what Stockton was doing as misleading, that he's breaching industry-wide professional codes of conduct while acknowledging that there will be added time and expense, but to look at that as an investment in the future of this industry. Stockton refused to see it that way. He called it obscene. In April of 2018, shortly after that letter was delivered to Stockton at the end of March, OceanGate canceled its June 2nd through June 9th expedition, rescheduling it to July of 2019, more than a year later. This information apparently came from the Hagels, the couple who paid for their tickets. This was supposed to be their trip to the Titanic, the one that was canceled and postponed a year, more than 5 years prior to the implosion. So what that tells us is nothing happened in those 5 years that made traveling to the Titanic wreckage any safer. Nothing got better. Nothing improved. Stockton was just biding his time. And COVID probably made things even easier for Stockton to continue down the path that he was going towards his ultimate doom. COVID probably acted like a big, huge distraction that allowed for Stockton to just run amok. Because when you're running amok in a world suffering through a global pandemic, it's likely that nobody's watching you. Then think about everything else that we were paying attention to during this time period going into 2020. It was an election year. COVID spreading across the globe. We had the killing of George Floyd in the midst of all this and the ensuing riots across the nation. The whole rest of the year, just so many people around the world dying of COVID, the race for a vaccine, getting into 2021, a new presidency, January 6th breach at the Capitol. And we kind of just limped through the remainder of 2021 and then boom, 2022, a full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia. The overturning of Roe v. Wade. There's so much noise going on in the world. And here goes Stockton Rush, getting as mad science-y as he wanted to, while the rest of the world didn't really notice all that much. But the people who mattered did notice. The funny thing is, well, there really isn't anything funny about this, but it's just a figure of speech. When the Titan did implode, the world at the time was relatively quiet. In early 2023, the year of the implosion, the economy was starting to suffer even more. Interest rates increased sharply. Criminal charges were filed against an American president for the first time. And then that spring, things were kind of quiet until Wendy Rush heard Stockton's submersible implode around 2 p.m. on June 18th, 2023, and we became fixated. Well, it was 2 p.m. here Pacific time. There it was still in the morning. The dive had just begun about 90 minutes in, so it was morning there in the North Atlantic. So I was using my time zone when I wrote that. That happened the afternoon of June 18th, 2023. It was a Sunday. It was Father's Day here in the United States. And all of a sudden, we were fixated on the air supply countdown. And even after that, things were quiet in the world until Palestine and Hamas launched an attack and kidnapping at the Israeli border. And that noise has been going on ever since. But still, we continued to watch what was going on with OceanGate and Titan. And from there, Stockton, his company, and his submersible became a rotation regular in our streams and in our feeds. Anyway, I'm getting off track here as usual, talking about everything else that was going on in the world when Stockton was behaving this way. Let me get back to my timeline. So, in July of 2018, OceanGate launched a counterattack against the naysayers, namely OceanGate's former director of marine operations, David Lockridge, and his wife. The two of them were named as defendants in a lawsuit that OceanGate filed against them. The next month, the Lockridges filed a counterclaim alleging a long series of safety concerns about the Titan submersible and also wrongful termination. 2 months later, the parties settled and the case was dismissed. But what would eventually come out because of that lawsuit was a dump of information, some of which we'd find out about in the wake of the Titan implosion and in the various documentaries and specials that have come out about this case ever since. Lockridge would end up dropping his wrongful termination suit. He was able to officially voice his concerns in a public forum, and OceanGate was made to agree to address his concerns. What we know now in hindsight is that Stockton kept going past that minor inconvenience and continued to do what he wanted to do with impunity. And Stockton Rush kept going. The following month, December of 2018, after the lawsuit was settled, CBS This Morning ran a story about Stockton having reached a depth of 13,000 feet during a dive on Titan in the Bahamas, which is 500 feet deeper than Titanic. This milestone was a critical component of Stockton's plans to make his dive to the Titanic in the upcoming year, 2019. And June of 2019 came and went with no dive to Titanic. OceanGate announced the expedition to the shipwreck would be delayed for another year. They'll dive in June of 2020. Now, I looked around to see if I could find the actual reasons why that specific dive was postponed. And I came across an article I found kind of interesting that I did not believe to be the full truth about why this second postponement took place. When I saw that there were a number of cancellations involving Titan to the Titanic expedition, I assumed that it had to do with the fact that passenger safety and Titan's safe an uneventful return to the surface could not be guaranteed with 100% certainty, which is where I believe the truth lies. However, that is not the story that was put out to the media. I am sure that the postponement had everything to do with the fact that their submersibles were not considered safe enough to make it to the depths of the Titanic wreck and back without the likelihood of some kind of catastrophic failure. This article, written June 13th, 2019 by Alan Boyle, said, Everett, Washington-based OceanGate has had to postpone this summer's deep-sea dives to the Titanic shipwreck just as they were about to start due to complications relating to the expedition's intended mothership. The complications have to do with the status of the Norwegian-flagged MV Havila Harmony under Canadian maritime law, OceanGate CEO Stockton Rush told GeekWire today. The ship's operators at Reach Subsea feared that the ship might be impounded if the expedition went forward as planned, Rush said. He said that the issue cropped up last Friday and that the resulting complications could not be resolved in time to do this year's Titanic survey expedition. The departure from St. John's, Newfoundland, had been scheduled for June 28th. I've been up in my life and I've been down in my life, Rush said. I was as happy as I ever been on Thursday night, and by Saturday I was almost as low as I've ever been. It's been quite a swing, and I hope I don't ever go through anything like that again. OceanGate's clients have paid more than $100,000 each to take part in the expedition as mission specialists. They were due to join professional crew members on the company's Titan deep-sea submersible to see the 107-year-old wreck of the Titanic, nearly 4,000 meters below the surface of the Atlantic. Those dives are now being rescheduled for mid-2020, and Rush said more than 75% of the mission specialists are willing to wait another year. The response has been all over the map, Rush said. I would say it's largely been supportive. This is a setback for them. It's a setback for us. This article in GeekWire concluded, quote, In the end, the sticking point had to do with a Canadian law against using foreign flagged vessels for commercial voyages that have Canadian ports as their starting and end points. Based on informal advice, it initially looked as if the Havila Harmony would be able to take on the Titanic expedition because the voyage didn't involve port-to-port commerce, Rush said. But as the date of the expedition neared, Reach Subsea picked up indications that there might be trouble. Late last week, OceanGate was notified that the risk of having the ship impounded was too great and the expedition would have to use a substitute vessel instead. But Rush had been told during earlier discussions that the substitute was unacceptable. Rush said that the issue couldn't be resolved in time to make the weather-dependent window for this summer's trips. When you start rushing an expedition, you start asking for mistakes. And in our business, mistakes could be fatal, Rush said. The article goes on to discuss the financial ramifications of the postponement and how there was going to be another push for equity to boost the privately held OceanGate's venture capital. At the end of the article, Rush was quoted as saying, "We're reassessing. Do we need to buy our own ship?" Yeah, that might have solved the problems if that was, in fact, the problem. And while that may have been one hiccup, it wasn't the fatal hiccup. Stockton Rush himself was the problem. By the way, I don't know when it's going to come up in the timeline, but in case it doesn't, I found out in the documentary on Netflix that Stockton, in a cost-cutting measure, left the Titan outdoors on a dock in sub-freezing weather and allowed the carbon fiber to freeze repeatedly. Carbon fiber cannot be left in frozen conditions for as long as it was. It was several months that it was left out there up in Newfoundland. Carbon fiber cannot be left in frozen conditions for as long as it was, and in doing so, it allowed for water to seep into the fibers of the hull. And even just a minimal amount of moisture that's freezing like that over an extended period of time can cause damage. In fact, every time Titan completed deep dives, several of them as deep, if not deeper, than the site of Titanic, every time it was towed through the water instead of on board the mothership, the carbon fiber hull sustained unseeable damage. Titan had also been struck by lightning, requiring an entirely new hull to be constructed, which was a huge setback for Stockton and OceanGate, especially financially. Again, all of that information I found in the documentary. I might go over the documentary after this in a later episode. I'm not sure, but it just had a lot of different information that I didn't include on here. They talked to a lot of insiders and former employees that worked for OceanGate at different times. I thought it was kind of interesting to watch. It was different, and that's where I kind of got the vibe that this was a lot like Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos, you know? Now, I just said that unseen damage was being caused, but the damage being done was definitely heard, and it was heard a lot. And it's very, very disturbing to have been on board and to hear these intermittent, loud popping and banging sounds. Those were the sounds of the carbon fiber breaking as the pressure increased with every meter the submersible descended. I'll talk more about that if we get into the documentary. I don't know how long this is going to be. I don't want to do more than 2 episodes because I was trying to move away from taking so long on one particular case. I am aiming for 2, but like I said, there's a lot of information in the documentary that I might want to share with you, possibly after I'm finished with my move into the new apartment, but we'll see. It would only be another 3 months after the June 2019 postponement that in October of 2019, OceanGate sent out an email to the Hagels that the June 2020 expedition was then canceled. From all that I could see, this cancellation had more to do with money than anything else at that point, as we know safety and survival wasn't atop Stockton's priority list. There was really no further explanation that I could find except a couple months later in January of 2020, OceanGate announced that it raised $18 million in equity financing, which would be used to expand its fleet of deep-sea submersibles to set the stage for 2021 dives to Titanic. And you know, if anything, COVID, like I said, probably helped Stockton navigate through all the stalling and cancellations. In February of 2020, NASA announced that it would partner with OceanGate to develop and manufacture new carbon fiber pressure vessels. And from there, the timeline jumped to November of 2020. I assumed that things were just quiet as the world was living in quarantine. So in November of 2020, a barrage of news articles hit with stories indicating that OceanGate would start its first tourist dives to the Titanic in 2021. And by March of 2021, OceanGate and NASA announced that astronaut and physician Scott Parazynski would join the Titanic expedition. And finally, in July of 2021, OceanGate completed its first submersible dive to the Titanic shipwreck, with a team that included Stockton, Scott Griffith, who was OceanGate's Director of Logistics and Assurance, and also the pilot of the Titan, and Paul-Henri Nargeolet, the French naval commander who perished in Titan's June 2023 implosion. I don't know if anybody else was on board for Titan's maiden dive to Titanic, but they did make it, and they made it back. And that might have been exactly why people trusted Stockton and Titan and OceanGate. They wanted to trust it, and because it survived, they all drank that Kool-Aid, and Titan would go on to survive several more dives to come. So the timeline that I've mostly been referring to as I go through the early 2020s is from Britannica.com, if I'm not mistaken. So the next thing is in September of 2021, OceanGate received patents for systems for curing, testing, validating, rating, and monitoring the integrity of composite structures. Okay, this is something that they talked about in detail in that documentary. They outfitted the walls of the hull with sensors to help indicate where weaknesses are presenting in real time. They're supposed to be able to tell you where in the hull there is something to be concerned about. But the bigger issue is what you're effectively listening to is your impending doom to arrive. If Titan sensors start telling you, oh shit, we have a problem, and you're 3,000 meters below sea level, what exactly are you supposed to do? You're cooked. I mean, you can literally imagine the terror that courses through every single fiber of your being every single time you hear the hull of the craft that you're in snap, crackle, and pop. I think I heard one person who had gone for a ride in Titan say that it's very unnerving. It's like playing Russian roulette. Every dive is a spin of the barrel. Eventually, that bullet's gonna land. This whole sensors being integrated into the carbon fiber in order to better be able to pinpoint vulnerabilities in the hull reminds me of the idea that the NFL had about putting sensors into helmets to better pinpoint areas of the brain that might have sustained damage or injury. But that's the thing. The NFL doesn't host games 4,000 meters underwater. They just get carted off the field when they're hurt. If you're that far underwater and your vessel is coming apart at the seams, it's time to say your prayers. I'm starting to feel like OceanGate's tagline should have been something like, "But did you die?" Yes, we did. Unless sensors and US patents can teleport you to the surface of the ocean lickety-split, then yes, you will die indeed. 2 months after obtaining the patent for looming death sensors, OceanGate announced that 2022 tickets to Titanic were going on sale, but the price more than doubled to $250,000, $250,000 to get the distinction of joining the last 1,500 unlucky people who bought their tickets to death on the Titanic the Unsinkable. The timeline then skips to July of 2022, when CBS correspondent David Pogue goes on a Titanic expedition with OceanGate and noted on one of the July dives they were unable to find Titanic, which I find to be actually kind of ridiculous. The timeline then skips ahead to January of 2023 and references an article from The Guardian. And while I couldn't find that article, I did find one on prweb.com from August of 2022. And really, most of that was all about Stockton thumping his chest over his fancy high-definition videos taken of Titanic, which I can appreciate to an extent. One of the things that I started hearing when I see these 5 people were killed, that enough's enough. We know what we need to know about Titanic. By this time, what Stockton was pushing was the notion that they were doing scientific research and wanted to track and document the rate at which the Titanic shipwreck was decaying. And so people were like, for what? It's been 40 years since the discovery of the wreckage. There's been controversy about disturbing the watery grave to begin with. By now, people know what they need to know. They know what they wanted to know. They know more than they needed to know and wanted to know. Let it be. Let these 1,496 souls rest. But now, make that 1,501 souls. The more I learn about the months and years leading up to the implosion, the more I see how little this was about science and innovation, and instead more about Stockton Rush and his BSD. The article that I've found read in part, the crew of the 2022 Titanic expedition succeeded in capturing unprecedented 8K footage of the Titanic, exposing an astonishing level of detail and colors. The extraordinary footage premiered on the OceanGate Expedition's YouTube channel today. The amazing detail in the 8K footage will help our team of scientists and maritime archaeologists characterize the decay of the Titanic more precisely as we capture new footage in 2023 and beyond. Capturing this 8K footage will allow us to zoom in and still have 4K quality, which is key for large screen and immersive video projects. Even more remarkable are the phenomenal colors in this footage, says Stockton Rush, president of OceanGate Expeditions. And you know what? When us regular folk are sitting here struggling day to day about how we're going to put food on the table, I'm thinking, I'm not that worried about how Titanic decay patterns work, unless that's going to pay my bills. I just feel like some things are out of reach. There are some places that just humans aren't meant to be, and down there is one of them. So by January of 2023, OceanGate had taken several dives all the way to Titanic and back. And I would like to say without incident, but that actually wouldn't be accurate. There were plenty of incidents, postponed dives, aborted dives, canceled dives, and let's not forget about those popping sounds. They're more like banging sounds, really loud, jarring banging sounds. There were dozens of pieces of equipment failures, things breaking off. I think I talked about all this in the first part. I might be repeating myself now. I'm sorry if I am. Things falling off, just a ton of logistical stuff going wrong. There was never an incident-free dive with Titan at OceanGate. So I'll say that by January of 2023, OceanGate had taken several dives all the way down to Titanic and back without a catastrophic incident. Everyone made it back without being vaporized, which is part of the reason why people were growing more and more confident with the reliability and safety of Titan. Imagine Stockton Rush and his BSD every single time he disembarked. I'm certain that his ego grew each time that he could say he did it again. There was a story on Guardian.com that reported OceanGate had taken about 60 customers and about 15 to 20 researchers to the Titanic wreckage site at that point. Speaking of customers, in February of 2023 now, that couple that I've mentioned several times throughout this episode, they'd paid for their deposit several years earlier in March of 2017, putting $10,000 down for each of them. So 6 years after they made their initial deposit, they ended up filing a lawsuit against Stockton in Florida, alleging fraudulent inducement and violation of Florida's Deceptive and Unfair Trade Practices Act. Then on May 26, 2023, Titan expeditions were in full swing, and on that date, OceanGate tweeted a picture of a group of 24 people involved with that specific expedition that was happening that day and captioned it with, quote, "It's been an exciting week with our mission 2 crew." The next week, on June 1st, 2023, OceanGate sent a tweet that said, "Despite being in the middle of the North Atlantic, we have the internet connection we need to make our #Titanic dive operations a success. Thank you at Starlink." OceanGate sent an identical tweet 2 weeks later on June 15th, 2023. 2 days later, on June 27th, 2023, one day before OceanGate sends Titan down into the water for the last time, one of OceanGate's paying mission specialists on that upcoming expedition, Hamish Harding, he was one of the billionaires and chairman of Action Aviation, he posted on his Facebook that he had joined OceanGate for the Titan mission and would be on the fateful June 18th, 2023 dive. The timeline then skips to dive day, which was June 18th. They set off from St. John's, Newfoundland, Canada on the MV Polar Prince, which used to be part of the Canadian Coast Guard's fleet. It was named previously Sir Humphrey Gilbert until it was sold in 2021 to a private company who renamed it the Polar Prince. It was chartered by OceanGate to bring the passengers or mission specialists or whatever they want to call them to the site of the Titanic while it towed Titan behind it, which is something that experts said should not have been the way that Titan was transported. That it would have been better if it had been hoisted onto the ship instead of towed through the rough, cold waters of the North Atlantic. I don't know if there's still a lot of ice in that particular area. It didn't look like it in any of the pictures, but ice does remain throughout the year, even in the summer, but mostly towards the Arctic areas. So the Polar Prince departed from St. John's on June 16th and arrived at the dive site the following day. The dive began about 9:20 in the morning Eastern Time on June 18th. It was approximately 10:45, so about an hour and 25 minutes later, that we would find out Stockton's wife, Wendy, was actually listening to and monitoring audio from Titan, and at about that time, she heard a sound come through. It sounded kind of like a muffled boom. At the time, they didn't know that that was the sound of Titan imploding. It occurred when Titan was at approximately at a depth of 500 meters or 1,600 feet. So they'd gotten only about 1/7 of the way down when the catastrophic failure occurred. It would have taken the sound of the implosion about 20 seconds or so to reach the surface. They'd spend the next approximately 8 hours trying to figure out why they lost communication with Titan, while also waiting for Titan to come back and resurface at its time that it was expected back at 3 p.m. It wasn't until maybe an hour or two after that that it was finally decided that they would report the submersible overdue to the Coast Guard, which is a decision that the company was criticized for. But in the famous words of old Stockton himself, I mean, you're dead anyway, right? What difference does it make when they come to rescue you? Well, it was supposed to have taken Titan about 2 hours to get to the ocean floor, if I'm not mistaken. I've heard different reports, but I think it takes approximately 2 hours. So I'm not sure why after 90 minutes that they had only made it through about 500 meters. They still had like more than 3,000 meters to go. I don't know why they were running late, but in the end, it wouldn't matter. So OceanGate contacted the U.S. Coast Guard a couple of hours after Titan failed to resurface, and it was reported that it and the 5 people on board were missing, about 900 nautical miles east of Cape Cod, Massachusetts. Search and rescue efforts commenced the next day, June 19th, and while we and the rest of the world watched and waited, assets from around the world were being considered to be used during the search effort, but the types of specialized equipment to make those kinds of underwater searches were not nearby. When all was done, the United States Coast Guard, the United States Navy, the Canadian Coast Guard, the Royal Canadian Navy, the French Navy, the British Royal Navy, the Chinese Navy, the Russian Navy, and the Japanese Navy all assisted in the coordinated search effort with their various aircraft, ships, and underwater robots. I don't know exactly when all hope was actually lost that anyone was going to be found and rescued, but it seemed like most of those, if not all of those, in the submersible community, and to me, most notably, James Cameron, the director, there was an air of frustration and anger by letting the world believe that there was hope, because they knew there wasn't. Anyone with even a basic understanding of the perils of deep water understood that these 5 people in that submersible ceased to exist the moment communication was lost, the moment Mrs. Rush heard that boom come through her computer. They felt like not only giving people false hope was cruel, that it was also reckless to allow others to be put at risk in hurrying up a rescue effort to save people that they knew were dead. I was one of the ones thinking that maybe there was a chance too. Now in hindsight, now that I know more, I can see the implausibility of finding survivors in a situation like that. But I didn't know everything that I know now, because now we all know what the experts in the submersible community feared for many, many years by the time Titan had imploded. They all knew it. It was only a matter of time. Another thing that annoyed director James Cameron as I watched some of his interviews was the hopes being lifted by the knocking sounds that one of the search aircraft picked up. Underwater noises that sounded human-made, like a rhythmic sounding 4 knocks. It went kind of like this. It was rhythmic. It sounded like it had to be something that a person had done. James Cameron was like, it's the ocean. Stuff's banging around and making noises all the time. They knew nobody was alive to create those sounds, and it was just cruel to him that families and loved ones were allowed to be given these false hopes. The Titan debris field was discovered on June 22nd. However, just so you know, if you Google search it, AI is going to tell you that it was found June 28th, but that's wrong. It was located approximately 500 meters off of Titanic's bow. Over the next few days and weeks, debris was brought up for the investigation, and along with it, they did find human remains within the debris that was recovered, and eventually, the DNA of all 5 people on board was identified. The wreckage was brought to St. John's a week later. On June 23rd, the Coast Guard convened a Marine Board of Investigation to determine what happened to Titan. The investigation is expected to take at least a year. OceanGate suspended all operations pretty much the day Titan imploded, but made the announcement that all operations were shutting down on July 2nd, so about 3 weeks or so later. OceanGate is still technically registered as a business, but has ceased all operations and is not involved in any submersible activities. In August of 2024, Paul-Henri Nargiolet's family filed a lawsuit against OceanGate and Stockton's estate seeking $50 million. The suit contends that Titan began dropping weights about 90 minutes into the dive, and I believe that that's the last communication that the surface support received from anyone on Titan, that they were dropping weights. The idea is at that point in the dive, they should not have been dropping weights because they were still descending. Because those weights were dropped, that meant something must have been going wrong and they wanted to begin to ascend. The lawsuit said in part, quote, "The crew may have well heard the carbon fibers cracking noise growing more intense as the weight of the water pressed on Titan's hull. By experts' reckoning, they would have continued to descend in full knowledge of the vessel's irreversible failures, experiencing terror and mental anguish prior to the Titan ultimately imploding." So the lawsuits can get a little sticky, but my big question was, when it comes to these lawsuits, what about the waivers? There must be some challenges to filing lawsuits, such as the one that Paul-Henri Nargiolet's family had filed. I mean, he assumed the risk, and it did mention mental anguish and trauma may be inflicted. The waivers were signed by passengers acknowledging the risks in deep-sea expeditions. What would have to be established is that OceanGate misled the passengers or misrepresented the submersible safety. It did say in the waiver that this was an experimental craft and that it had not been rated by any regulatory entity, and you might die, period. However, and there's always buts and loopholes, right? But the waivers don't really specifically and explicitly mention all potential dangers or actual misconduct on the part of OceanGate that could have led to the implosion. Legal experts have suggested that if there were any aspects of Titan's design or the way it was being used and operated that were not disclosed, or if OceanGate exercised gross negligence, then the waivers may not have an impact because they won't apply, which will open the door for families to pursue litigation. The investigative board determined that the primary contributing factor leading to the implosion of Titan to several key factors, including but not limited to OceanGate's inadequate submersible design, certification, maintenance, and inspection as it is related to Titan. Other factors that contributed to Titan's fate listed in the report also included the toxicity of OceanGate's workplace culture, which may have affected best safety practices, but being real, it did affect it. If Stockton wasn't firing and subsequently suing employees turned whistleblowers, if those employees had their say, if their concerns were heard, Titan would have never been sent down with people in it or with anyone else other than Stockton himself. There were people Stockton tried to pressure into piloting Titan who flat out refused. Were the passengers told that? I wonder. Probably not. Are you going to tell the passengers, hey, you know what? Guess what? The person who designed and helped build and certify this craft as rated for diving to the Titanic refuses to get on? I mean, I would be like, are you serious? The person responsible, the engineer who basically designed and built this entire thing, refuses to get inside of it. I would be really bothered by that fact. So as I was writing this, I wrote, I'm actually sitting in my oil shop right now, typing the last of this, and I was telling my employee about how there was a time when Titan did a dive with Stockton, and I think there were 2 or 3 other people who were invited on, maybe employees of OceanGate or members of the media. I can't exactly recall at the moment. And I was just mentioning to one of my employees that the Titan went on a dive once and actually couldn't find Titanic. And like, I'd be really bothered by that too. Seriously, in this day and age, with the levels at which we are operating technologically, it seems like it would take an idiot to get lost on their way to Titanic, considering that they'd already been there. And really, there's no reason anyone should ever be lost when you're trying to go anywhere, especially when the place you're going has been gone to many, many times across several decades. I wouldn't even get into an Uber if the driver was like, "Oh, I'm lost. I got to take you back home." I'd be like, "I'm good. Just pull over. Drop me off right here. I got this." Anyway, other reasons listed in the final report on the causes of the implosion included inadequate domestic and international regulatory frameworks for submersible operations and vessels of novel design, the failure to properly investigate and address known hull anomalies following Titan's 2022 Titanic expedition, and inadequate real-time monitoring systems that generated data not analyzed or acted upon during the 2022 Titanic expedition. The report emphasizes the need for stronger oversight and clear options for operators exploring new concepts outside the existing regulatory framework. It also recommends adding Coast Guard personnel capacity at headquarters to support new construction oversight and field inspections involving submersibles and vessels of novel design. The final report's more than 300 pages, so it was hard to really come up with the full and comprehensive summary of all of the equipment issues that OceanGate had with its submersibles, but some of them I mentioned in part 1, including the forward dome falling off during recovery, drop weight issues, including the tray being jettisoned, I guess throwing off or falling off altogether, due to malfunction, drop weight and thruster failures, platforms being damaged during recovery, damage during transporting Titan around, batteries dying on Titan causing the time spent inside the submersible to extend an extra 27 hours. The aft fairing tore off during recovery. I don't know what an aft fairing actually is. It's part of the rear of the vessel that lends support to the hull. Titan being damaged during weight drops, thrusters going into reverse for some reason. I did find more details about Titan being stored outdoors in Newfoundland for an extended period of time. Upon completion of an expedition, Titan was stored on a dock without protection from the elements from July 26, 2022 through February 6, 2023. That's the off-season. They can only go to the Titanic site during the summer, right? Well, like I said, Titan sat out there through the coldest months of the year, causing unseen and irreversible damage to the carbon fiber. Equipment issues also listed the fact that Titan had to be towed to the Polar Prince. I brought that up earlier as well. And you know what? The bottom line is Titan should have been carried on a ship. But to save money, they used a ship that didn't have adequate deck space, launching equipment, and weight handling equipment to do that. So Titan was towed to save money in order to having to charter a ship that could hoist it on to its dock. Issues that the expeditions had included Titan and its platform having partially sank and the tail cone fairing ripping off, variable ballast tank issues, the platform inverting during one resurfacing error and caused a 45-degree angle. It caused the Titan to tilt at a 45-degree angle, sending the bow of the Titan up, slamming all 5 passengers towards the stern. Titan became partially disconnected from the lift and recovery system, causing it and its occupants to be slammed around for an hour until they could correct the platform. I also mentioned Titan had been struck by lightning once, and I believe this led to the hull having been completely replaced. I want to say in 2020, around there. It was COVID time, I think. And that hull had to be completely replaced, and that's what led to Stockton getting expired carbon fiber at a discount rate from Boeing. The carbon fiber had too many deficiencies, too many laminations, too many voids, too many imperfections. Runs of glue were all over the place. This thing was being repaired with glue that could be seen. Recycled parts were used from older submersibles. Domes were reused, as were ceiling faces, acrylic parts. And one of the most troubling things I found, the acrylic dome at the bow was only rated to 1,300 meters, whereas Titan was diving 3,800 meters to Titanic, 3 times further than what it's actually rated for. And that detail in Titan's design and the paperwork about this was hidden from employees. The engineer that was hired to replace the person who would become the main whistleblower was basically a kid just out of college who did what he was told to do and took part in the hiding of the dome raiding. Though that engineer claimed he raised concerns, it seems like he was pressured by Stockton to just keep going. Stockton had no intentions of getting Titan classed or rated. His thing was these certifications were for submersibles not made from carbon fiber. So he didn't think that any of that needed to apply to him and his unique design. That engineer, the one right out of college, as much as he went ahead and looked the other way when it came to safety, he did have the sense to refuse to get into it. He was the one I mentioned a little while ago. In conclusion, I wanted to share an excerpt from a recent article I read on birminghamjournal.co.uk dated October 23, 2025, entitled Stockton Rush and the Titan Submersible Legacy. In part, it said, "When it comes to policy shifts, the 2023 implosion triggered major changes in international maritime safety protocols. In 2024, the International Maritime Organization, or the MIO, and classification societies such as DNV, the one based in Norway I mentioned earlier, and Lloyd's Registers, implemented new regulations requiring certifications for all crewed submersibles intended for commercial or scientific missions below 3,000 meters. Governments, including the United States and Canada, now require third-party validation before authorizing deep-sea expeditions. The tragedy effectively ended an era of privately operated, uncertified deep ocean vessels. In terms of technological lessons since 2023, engineering institutions and oceanic agencies have reevaluated the use of carbon fiber composites and pressure vessels. The material, while strong in tension, proved vulnerable under repetitive compressive stress. Companies like Triton Submarines and Deep Flight have since returned to traditional titanium designs, incorporating advanced AI-based structural monitoring systems for real-time safety analysis. As for Stockton Rush's legacy in 2025, 2 years after his death, he remains a polarizing figure. To some, he represents the spirit of human curiosity and the courage to take risks in pursuit of discovery. To others, Stockton stands for a warning of what happens when ambition outpaces caution. And dreamers, just so you know, I kind of disagree with that sentiment. I don't think Stockton exercised any measure of caution in what he did, and I really don't think the guy was ambitious, curious, or courageous at all. I believe him to be narcissistic, delusional, and really demonstrated the opposite of courage by ducking and dodging and bobbing and weaving around things that he was afraid would stand in his way. Instead of facing challenges and roadblocks, he ran and hid from them, while at the same time, he bullied through everything and everybody in order to get his way. That's what Stockton Rush's legacy looks like to me. This article continued, OceanGate's closure has paved the way for new companies focusing on certified safety-first exploration. Research institutions and private ventures are developing next-generation submersibles capable of reaching the Heddle Zone safely. The Heddle Zone being the deepest parts of the ocean, by the way. I didn't know what that meant. Meanwhile, the Titan disaster continues to influence documentaries, literature, and discussions on innovation ethics. In 2025, university courses in marine engineering and entrepreneurship often use Stockton Rush as a case study on the intersection of technology, leadership, and responsibility. Probably having similar conversations at university about Elizabeth Holmes too, I'm sure. The Titan incident changed how engineers approached materials science. Real-world testing under actual conditions, once seen as optional due to simulation technology, is now mandatory. It has also highlighted the psychological factor, the need for humanity in design. The concept of deep-sea tourism is not dead, but has evolved. Post-2023 companies now collaborate with governments and universities for joint missions that prioritize scientific value and transparency. The incident served as a reality check that innovation must serve humanity, not ego. The story of Stockton Rush has sparked debates on the nature of exploration. Should pioneers be celebrated despite catastrophic failures, or should such tragedies be seen as preventable? Public opinion remains divided, but his name has become synonymous with both innovation and hubris. I disagree with the innovation part. What Stockton Rush was trying to do was apply what he studied in college, which was aeronautical engineering, to underwater travel. Carbon fiber is being used more and more in modern airplane construction, including commercial planes. Carbon fiber had been considered for SpaceX rockets, but even they decided to stick with traditional materials because of how much potential there was for imperfections to be in carbon fiber in a vehicle the size of a SpaceX rocket. So even Elon Musk had the sense to agree with the decision to stick with stainless steel, and he's sending people into a literally weightless environment. And he was even like, nah, I'll pass on the carbon fiber. In an environment without gravity, he didn't even think carbon fiber was safe. Yet somehow, Stockton, who was billions and billions and billions of dollars poorer than Elon, was like, imperfections, shimperfections. He's like a kid who covers his eyes and his whole face with his hands like nobody can see him. What you can't see can't hurt you, right? Now, I do think innovators and pioneers should absolutely be celebrated if their intentions are truly to be those things with genuineness and respect. Not because you want to be a big swinging dick. Oh, I hate that term. But I wanted to just, sometimes it just has to be said because of how ridiculous it is. BSD. I've wondered though, if Stockton Rush could be given a do-over, would he change the way he did things? The article concluded by saying, entrepreneurs and engineers can learn several lessons from Stockton's journey. The first is that innovation must always coexist with accountability. No advancement justifies the loss of human life when safeguards are possible. Secondly, regulatory oversight is not a barrier to progress but a foundation for sustainable innovation. Lastly, humility remains an essential trait for every explorer. The ocean is not a domain to be conquered but a mystery to be respected. Stockton Rush's story has entered public consciousness beyond science. His life has inspired books, documentaries, even debates, and this episode of Killafornia Dreaming, of course. The Titan disaster, often compared to the Challenger explosion in 1986, symbolizes the fine line between pioneering vision and perilous oversight. While his legacy remains complicated, it also acts as a mirror reflecting humanity's dual nature, endlessly curious yet sometimes tragically flawed. I like that article a lot. The author is just listed as Shentanu. It's more of a blog post than an article, but it was written in a way and with words I don't know if I would have been able to come up with on the fly like this when talking about Stockton, because I don't share those same opinions of him. Just because he's dead doesn't mean I feel like he should be held in high esteem for it. But that's just where the opinions divide, and I think I land pretty squarely on one side of it. And if Stockton were to have sent passengers into the ocean to be vaporized without having joined them, I'd expect him to get slapped with some manslaughter charges and eventually given a new adventure to an all-expense-paid extended stay at the federal penitentiary. There's one last thing I want to talk about, and that's what Stockton knew versus what he believed versus what he wanted. I am curious as to what all of you listening think about what Stockton Rush knew to be fact versus what he believed in his heart versus what he wanted from all of this. I heard one YouTuber say that they believe Stockton wanted to become part of Titanic lore to a point that he was even so far as having a death wish about it. I don't know if I think that to be true. It just kind of goes against human nature. We want to live for the most part. We want to survive. It's an instinct. And then it won't make sense to have this desire for notoriety and recognition when you're not around to experience it. And of course, we can get into all that whole afterlife stuff and Stockton looking up at us from the bottom of the ocean, just sitting back and enjoying his posthumous fame or infamy, depending on who you're talking to, I guess. And that was the tale of the Delusions of Grandeur, the Folly of Stockton Rush. This really has been one of my favorite cases to consume content about, which I've been doing pretty much for the entire month of October and whatever part of November we've already passed through now at this point, which is why I have all this scattered information from all different sources. Now that I'm back in the real life workforce, I'm doing a lot more running around and a lot more waiting around. And it actually gives me a great deal of time to put together these episodes now. September and October were kind of some tough months for me. I'm dumping everything that I have into this business, this quick oil change business here in Las Vegas. It's been stressful and anxiety inducing, but hiding in my office any chance that I have to sit down and write these episodes for you has been so cathartic. So after this, I'm jumping back on Patreon. In case you're not subscribed, we've recently covered the case of Jade Jenks out of San Diego, California, and the bizarre murder of her stepfather, 64-year-old butterfly farmer Thomas Merriman. I really could use more love over at Patreon, and you guys have really stepped up and answered my call, and I appreciate it. Like I said in the beginning, so helpful. You don't even know how much it means to me. Just even the $1, when I see the little email pop up, I get so excited that people care enough to take out their time of their day to subscribe. So please consider. Thank you all so much for listening. Thank you for the love. Also, give some love to my social media pages for the oil shop. It's called Costa Oil Las Vegas. Friend me on Facebook. I accept most friend requests. If I haven't accepted yours, please reach out to me, message me. If you listen to the podcast, then I consider us friends. Okay, my loves, I will be back shortly with another amazing true crime case. And until then, please take care, be safe, and sweet dreams.